Your fair housing responsibilities, I'm going to bring anyone who is financially qualified, and you should be aware that if you are setting these restrictions, you are opening yourself up to liability. You may want to consult a lawyer. And you will be equally liable if you don't distance yourself. If a customer finds out that an apartment is not being shown to them because the landlord doesn't want a certain group of people, and you haven't said something to your broker, you haven't said something to the landlord, and you haven't informed your customer that the landlord doesn't want to do business with you, you may be named in a lawsuit. You're going to be held complicit. Yes?
Okay, now, in a situation like that, I did exactly that. Okay? And the landlord just said, okay, so have a nice day.
Okay.
So I left. Now, in my mind, my question is, what kind of measures are being taken against landlords like that to even out the playing field, like for a company that doesn't want to discriminate, yet in a market like New York City that's so competitive, and really, a lot of things happen behind the scenes, from what you hear and from what you see, like in the news and lawsuits and things of that nature. In order for a company that is trying to do everything the right way to actually be able to earn that business on a massive scale, you understand? Because like right now, I've said it to a few landlords, and all of them have told me, okay, get out of my house, or something along those lines.
I understand, and I understand your concern because you know that as soon as you walk out the door, the landlord is going to call somebody else and going to keep calling until he or she finds someone that will do what he wants. That's why you have to be proactive. You need to tell your broker, and your broker ought to contact a fair housing agency. You're in New York City, you should contact New York City Fair Housing Agency. You can contact HUD, the government agency.
The New York State Commission, New York City Commission on Human Rights would be the one here.
Right. And they should be reported. Now, I know that in many situations you want to remain anonymous. You don't have to report and have your name attached to it, but you do need to notify someone. Now, are you aware of fair housing testing? Do you know what that is? Okay. You may have been tested, you may not have. Presumably, if you were tested, you didn't discriminate, which is good, because you'd only know that you were being tested if you did something inappropriate. So a situation like that would be very appropriate for fair housing testing. And if you notify a fair housing agency, they might just do a fair housing test, because after all, who's there to witness the transaction? Someone says, you say, well, that person discriminated, and the landlord says, I didn't. How do you prove it? And that's why we would engage in fair housing testing, where we would simulate a fair housing transaction to see if the same thing happened again. And then that would be used as evidence in a lawsuit or an administrative hearing. But again, how do you also protect? If you think that if the landlord has been blatant about saying, I will not rent to certain groups of people, you have a duty to tell your customer, because your customer has a right to enforce his or her housing rights. So if you have a landlord that's saying, I am not going to rent to Hispanic people or to African American people, that customer has a right to sue.
And then the New York City Human Rights Commission will send out testers to verify what has happened.
I just want to remind everybody, when everybody signs up to join the company, we put examples of how inadvertently you could be discriminating the fair housing. One example we put is a gay couple goes and looks at a place, and the rental agent is showing it, and the landlord happens to be there. The gay couple wants to apply for the apartment. The landlord then says to the salesperson, you know what, I said I didn't mind gay people, but I didn't know they were that gay. So, that first of all, no, what I'm saying is what happened in that scenario, because the real estate company got sued, what happened in that scenario was the salesperson thought he could smooth things out with the couple and and said, you know what, it's not us. This landlord's just a bigot. He doesn't understand what's going on. Sorry about that. Let's go and show you some other places and whatever. Thought that was the case. But they went to Lambda, reported the incident, and Lambda sent the tester out to go see the same type of apartment, call the same salesperson, because the salesperson didn't show them that apartment, that the landlord and the company still had it listed in its database. The company and the salesperson was held responsible. So you may think you're doing the right thing by avoiding them getting turned down by a bigot landlord, but if the company still has a listing in the database, we are an acting participant. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely, that's a perfect example, and that is absolutely what we're saying, that if you don't actively...
So if you guys want an extra copy, I will email everybody tonight all of these scenarios that you could potentially get yourself entangled in. I know you guys signed it when you first started with us, but as time goes on, and in the heat of the moment, you forget these things, but I will email you everything tonight so you have a second look. There's many different ways just like that to be held culpable and responsible for doing something that you thought was just innocent.
Let's do the quiz.
Right. Okay, let's move on. We are actually going to do a real quiz. That was not the quiz. In your packets of materials, there is a fair housing quiz.
On the right-hand side.
And we're going to ask you to take a few minutes to answer the questions.
Green one, right?
Is it green?
It's bright green.
Yes, bright green, right.
Fair housing quiz is bright green.
All right, we'll give you a few minutes and then we're going to go over the answers. We're not collecting them, but we're going to talk about them.
You're skipping that.
Yes, I see it. Right there.
The bright green.
Thank you very much. I look like I was fumbling.
You're not going to have a packet? You'll get one?
I'll get the sign-in sheet. Why don't you start with the
And we're
answers
just
to the test?
we're finished. Did you two sign in? Okay. Okay, we're ready to re-begin. Okay, under federal fair housing laws, it is legal to prohibit A, smoking. Yes. You can prohibit smoking in a building, sure. It is legal.
It is legal. Is it legal?
Wait, what?
It is legal to say no to smoking.
You got it. Okay, let's continue. Can you say no to drinking?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can you say no to a live-in caretaker for a resident with a disability? No. Any questions about that? You can say, that's a good question, because then we would have to see whether it's possible to get a reasonable accommodation or modification to permit a caregiver in that apartment. We'd have to, the number of square feet, we'd have to check. Yes. Okay, second question.
Oh. Okay. All right, which of the following are violations of the fair housing laws? Okay, how about A? Does A violate the fair housing laws? Yes. And believe it or not, there are still people who think that people should have the right to sell to whomever they want. B, a sales associate puts the phrase adults only in an MLS listing.
Violation.
Now that's a bit of a trick question. That's a maybe. And do you know why it's a maybe? Exactly. Senior housing facilities, designated senior housing facilities may restrict
I would never have said that. Good.
to, in New York State, 55 and above, and in a federally funded building, age 62 and above. Okay, how about C? What if a landlord refuses to rent to a convicted sex offender? Does that violate the law?
No. Yes, it does. They just have to report their location.
That is not a violation of the Fair